The first droplet of water struck the metallic floor with a rhythm that had sustained generations. Deep beneath the ruins of what was once called New Denver, Area Chen adjusted the quantum resonance filter of her family's life support system, her fingers moving with the practiced precision of a surgeon. The filter was more than a mere piece of technology. It was a lifeline, a testament to humanity's most critical innovation: survival. Around her, the massive underground chamber hummed with a complex ecosystem that defied everything the outside world believed possible. Hydroponic gardens stretched across multiple levels, their bioluminescent leaves casting a soft green glow that contrasted with the industrial gray of the surrounding infrastructure. Fusion reactors pulsed with a steady, almost heartbeat-like rhythm, providing power that would make the most advanced alien technologies look primitive by comparison. Arya paused, catching her reflection in the polished surface of a nearby filtration unit. Her eyes, a striking blend of her Chinese and Brazilian heritage, reflected generations of adaptation. The genetic modifications that allowed her to thrive in this subterranean world were subtle but profound. Enhanced lung capacity, improved thermal regulation, and neural pathways that could process complex environmental data in milliseconds. These were the true weapons of human survival. A holographic display flickered to life, its quantum-encrypted surface showing the latest orbital scans from the Zortak survey ships. To their sensors, Earth appeared to be nothing more than a radioactive wasteland. Decaying infrastructure, toxic environmental readings, minimal energy signatures, everything suggested a dead world, a failed colony long abandoned to its fate. Precisely as planned. Maintenance cycle complete, a soft AI voice announced. It was more than a simple computer system. It was a descendant of the first adaptive AI developed during humanity's darkest hours. Each iteration had been carefully cultivated, its ethical frameworks refined through generations of survival. Aria's grandmother, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, had been one of the original architects of this underground civilization. Her journals, carefully preserved in the Central Memory Archives, told the story of impossible choices. When the first colonial attempts failed and the Zortak abandoned Earth, most believed humanity was finished. But Elena and a few hundred survivors had other plans. The chamber around Area was a living museum of human resilience. Sections of the wall displayed preserved technology from different eras. Primitive solar panels from the early 21st century, quantum computing prototypes from the mid-22nd century, adaptive nanite research from the critical survival period. Each artifact told a story of innovation born from desperation. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. The daily communication burst was incoming, a carefully encrypted transmission that maintained contact between the various underground settlements. Arya moved to the communication hub, her movements fluid and practiced. The message was brief but crucial. Orbital tracking had detected increased Zortak survey activity. Their scans were becoming more frequent, more intense. To most, this would seem like a threat. To the underground leaders, it was an opportunity. Preparation Phase 3 is now active. The message read, "All sectors confirm readiness." Arya's lips curved into a smile that held generations of carefully cultivated patience. The Zortak believed Earth was dead. They had written off an entire planet, an entire species, as a failed experiment. They had no idea that beneath the toxic surface, humanity had not just survived. They had been preparing. She adjusted a series of quantum dampeners, further masking the settlement's energy signatures. The technology was so advanced that it could bend quantum fluctuations, making their entire civilization virtually invisible to even the most sophisticated scanning technologies. Outside this chamber, the surface of Earth remained a desolate wasteland. Rusted infrastructure, toxic landscapes, minimal signs of life. To the Zortak survey ships making their routine passes, it was just another dead world, a footnote in galactic colonization efforts. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. Arya Chen looked up at the chamber's ceiling, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the hydroponic gardens. Somewhere above, Alien ships continued their meaningless scans, completely unaware that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology, not warfare, but patience and revenge. The Nexus thrummed with potential energy, a testament to human ingenuity that defied every known principle of technological development. Dr. Marcus Okoro stood at the epicenter of humanity's most ambitious project, watching as a swarm of nanite constructs reconstructed a prototype faster-than-light communication array. Each microscopic machine was a marvel of engineering, more complex than entire alien starships, more adaptable than any known technological system in the galaxy. Marcus traced a holographic interface, his augmented fingers leaving trails of quantum data in their wake. The room around him was more than a research facility. It was a living museum of human survival, with walls lined with artifacts that told the story of humanity's most desperate period. Preserved solar panels from the early 21st century hung alongside quantum computing prototypes and adaptive nanite research specimens. Each item was a chapter in humanity's most incredible story, the tale of a species that refused to die. The nanite swarm began to coalesce, forming intricate patterns that defied traditional understanding of matter and energy. Marcus watched carefully, his augmented eyes capturing details invisible to unmodified human perception. These weren't just machines. They were the culmination of generations of research, of survival, of pure human determination. A holographic display flickered to life, projecting a comprehensive map of Zortak communication networks. Years of careful intelligence gathering had been meticulously compiled into this system. Red lines traced potential vulnerabilities, blue nodes represented communication hubs, and pulsing yellow markers indicated strategic weak points that could be exploited. Quantum entanglement stabilization at 99.7%. The facility's AI announced. The voice was more than a simple computer system. It was a direct descendant of the first adaptive AI developed during humanity's darkest hours. Each iteration had been carefully cultivated, its ethical frameworks refined through generations of survival. Marcus's grandmother had been one of the original architects of this research initiative. Her journals, preserved in the Central Archives, told a story of impossible choices and even more impossible hopes. When the Zortak had abandoned Earth, leaving the first human colonies to die, most would have surrendered. But Dr. Elena Okoro, like so many others, chose a different path. A soft alarm interrupted his thoughts. The daily intelligence update was incoming, a burst of encrypted data that represented humanity's eyes and ears in the galactic community. Marcus moved to the primary analysis station, his movements precise and calculated. The data was extraordinary. Recent Zortak fleet movements suggested increased interest in Earth's solar system. Most would see this as a threat. Marcus saw an opportunity. He began manipulating the holographic display, overlaying intelligence data with predictive models. Each projection was a potential scenario. Each line of quantum code a weapon more devastating than any physical assault. The Zortak believed they were dealing with a dead world. They had no idea of the technological singularity brewing beneath the surface. The nanite swarm began to reconfigure the communication array, its movements almost organic. Quantum processors integrated seamlessly, creating a communication system that could potentially communicate across multiple dimensions. It was more than technology. It was a middle finger to every alien civilization that had written humanity off. Marcus's augmented vision zoomed in on the nanite construction. Each microscopic machine was a marvel of engineering, capable of adaptive reconfiguration, self-repair, and quantum-level communication. They represented decades of research, of pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. A holographic image of the original research team materialized, a diverse group of scientists and engineers who had dedicated their lives to ensuring humanity's survival. Most were long dead, their legacy continued by their descendants. Marcus recognized his grandmother among them, her eyes burning with the same determination he felt now. Preparation Phase 3 tracking complete, the AI announced. The words carried the weight of generations of preparation, of carefully cultivated revenge. The communication array began to pulse with a soft, almost living light. It was more than a piece of technology. It was a beacon of hope, a signal that humanity was far from finished. The Zortak had made a critical mistake in believing Earth was dead. They would soon learn the truth. Marcus Okoro allowed himself a slight smile. Somewhere above the underground facility, alien ships continued their routine scans, completely unaware of the technological storm brewing beneath the surface of a world they had long considered dead. Humanity was ready, and this time, they would not be forgotten. The first Zortak scout ship entered Earth's orbital space with the arrogance of a predator approaching what it believed to be a long-dead prey. Captain Vornak reviewed the standard reconnaissance protocols, his three-fingered hands moving across holographic displays that showed nothing but expected data, residual radiation, decaying infrastructure, minimal energy signatures. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. Beneath the planet's seemingly dead surface, the first phase of humanity's response began with a symphony of silence. Weapon platforms that had been hidden for generations emerged from geological camouflage, not with explosive violence, but with a calculated precision that suggested months, years, decades of planning. In the underground command center, Admiral Elena Rodriguez watched the unfolding scenario with eyes that had seen humanity's darkest moments. Her neural interface connected her directly to the defensive network, each thought a potential weapon, each memory a strategic calculation. The first electromagnetic pulse was silent. To the Zortak sensors, it appeared to be nothing more than a minor system fluctuation. But within milliseconds, the pulse began its devastating work. Quantum-encrypted signals danced between the alien ship systems, not destroying them outright, but creating a cascading failure that would paralyze the vessel from the inside out. Target 1 neutralized, a soft voice announced. It wasn't human, wasn't exactly AI, it was something entirely new. An adaptive intelligence that had been cultivated through generations of survival, of preparation. Vornak's first indication that something was wrong came when his primary navigation systems began to fail. Backup systems flickered, quantum-encrypted communication channels became garbled. It was as if the very fabric of their technological superiority was being unraveled by an invisible hand. Beneath the planet's surface, massive rail gun platforms began to emerge. They were not simple weapons, but architectural marvels of human engineering. Each platform was a combination of geological camouflage, adaptive materials, and quantum-locked targeting systems that could calculate trajectory and impact with terrifying precision. The first railgun round struck the second Zortak scout ship with such perfection that it appeared to defy the laws of physics. No explosive flash, no traditional weapon signature, just a hypervelocity projectile that passed through the ship's shields as if they were nothing more than mist. In the command center, Admiral Rodriguez's team worked with a synchronicity that spoke of generations of preparation. Each member was more than a soldier. They were the culmination of humanity's most advanced genetic and technological modifications. Enhanced neural pathways, quantum-integrated combat interfaces, adaptive thinking mechanisms that could process complex scenarios in fractions of a second. Vornak's communications officer tried to send a distress signal. The attempt was futile. Humanity's quantum communication jamming system was so advanced that it could not only block transmissions but could also send false signals that would completely disorient any rescue attempts. Phase 2 initiating, the adaptive intelligence announced. The remaining Zortak ships began to realize something was terribly wrong. Their sensors showed nothing, no weapon signatures, no traditional attack vectors. Just a systematic, clinical dismantling of their technological superiority. Another rail gun round. Another ship neutralized. Each fallen vessel became a message. Humanity was not dead. Humanity was not forgotten. Humanity was something far more terrifying than the Zortak could have ever imagined. Admiral Rodriguez allowed herself the slightest smile. Decades of preparation, of waiting, of carefully cultivating their technological and strategic advantage. It was all coming to fruition. The Zortak had written off Earth as a dead world. They had abandoned humanity's first colonies, believing them to be a failed experiment. They would soon learn the true meaning of their mistake. In the underground command center, holographic displays showed the systematic destruction of the Zortak scout fleet. No unnecessary violence, no wasteful explosions, just a precise, calculated response that demonstrated humanity's true technological superiority. All targets neutralized, the adaptive intelligence announced. Outside, to any distant observers, it would appear that nothing had happened. Just another dead world, spinning silently in the vast darkness of space. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The first transmission hit the Zortak communication networks like a quantum-encrypted knife, slicing through their most secure channels with surgical precision. Dr. Imani Okik watched from the Psychological Warfare Division, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that was part communication system, part weaponized narrative engine. It wasn't just information. It was a carefully crafted weapon. The transmission began with a visual record, pristine, untouched historical footage that the Zortak had long forgotten. Images of the first human colonial attempts, the desperate struggles, the moment of abandonment. But this was no simple historical document. Each frame was encoded with quantum-encrypted psychological triggers designed to exploit the deepest fractures in Zortak social structures. Initiate narrative cascade. Imani whispered to the adaptive intelligence system that surrounded her. The walls of the underground communication center seemed to pulse with anticipation, every surface a potential conduit for humanity's most sophisticated psychological weapon. The first layer of the transmission targeted the Zortak's collective memory. Personal logs of colonists left to die, meticulously preserved and now weaponized, began to flood every communication channel. These were not just dry historical records. They were emotional narratives crafted to create maximum psychological impact. A colonist's final message, recorded moments before expected death. They promised to return. They promised to help. But we were abandoned. The audio was perfect, every tremor of fear, every hint of betrayal captured with crystalline clarity. In the central communication hub of the Zortak Confederation, communication analysts began to experience something unprecedented. The transmission wasn't just information. It was a cognitive virus, a narrative weapon that attacked the very foundations of their social and political structures. Vornak, the scout ship commander who had led the failed mission to Earth, found himself at the center of a rapidly expanding political storm. The personal logs began to reveal uncomfortable truths about previous colonial missions, about calculated decisions to abandon struggling human settlements. Each transmission was a carefully designed piece of a larger psychological puzzle. Quantum-encrypted data packets warmed through the Zortak communication networks, creating false correlations, highlighting internal conflicts, exposing long-buried secrets. "We are activating Phase 4, the adaptive intelligence announced. Its voice was neither human nor machine. It was something entirely new, a product of generations of careful development. Imani watched as the first cracks began to appear in the Zortak's communication networks. Political factions that had been stable for centuries began to fracture. Diplomatic channels became battlegrounds of conflicting narratives. The psychological warfare was multidimensional. It wasn't just about revealing past betrayals. It was about creating a narrative so compelling, so emotionally devastating, that it would tear apart the Zortak's social fabric from the inside. Personal stories began to emerge. A child's recorded message to parents who never returned. A scientist's final research notes detailing the impossible challenges of survival. Each narrative was a precision-guided emotional weapon. In the Zortak Central Governance Chamber, debates erupted. Communication channels became battlegrounds. The carefully maintained facade of collective unity began to crumble, revealing deep-seated fractures that had been hidden for generations. The narrative vectors are performing beyond projected parameters, the adaptive intelligence reported. Its tone carried something almost like satisfaction, a hint of the complex ethical frameworks that had been cultivated through generations. Imani allowed herself a moment of reflection. This was more than revenge. This was a calculated dismantling of an entire civilization's psychological infrastructure. The Zortak had written off humanity as a failed experiment. Now, humanity was returning the favor not with traditional weapons, but with something far more devastating: information, memory, narrative. The transmission continued, each quantum-encrypted packet a carefully designed weapon. Personal stories, historical records, emotional triggers, all weaponized into a narrative assault that would make traditional warfare look primitive by comparison. Complete network saturation achieved, the adaptive intelligence announced. Outside the underground communication center, the world remained silent. To any distant observers, nothing had changed. Just another dead planet, spinning silently in the vast darkness of space. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The testing chamber trembled with potential energy, a cathedral of human innovation that defied every known principle of technological development. Major Rebecca Chen stood at the epicenter of humanity's most ambitious technological project, her combat suit a living testament to generations of adaptive engineering. As she moved, the suit responded, not just as equipment, but as an extension of her own consciousness. Quantum neural interfaces woven through microscopic adaptive materials created a symbiosis between human and technology that would make the most advanced Zortak systems look like primitive toys. Systems integration at 99.8%, the adaptive intelligence announced. The voice was more than a simple computer system. It was a direct descendant of the first AI developed during humanity's most desperate hours. Each iteration had been carefully cultivated, its ethical frameworks refined through generations of survival. The combat suit was breathing, literally breathing. Adaptive nanomembranes expanded and contracted, mimicking biological respiratory systems, while simultaneously processing environmental data at quantum speeds. Microscopic sensor arrays could detect threats before they manifested, predictive algorithms calculating potential scenarios with a complexity that bordered on prescience. Rebecca's augmented eyes swept across the testing chamber. Holographic displays populated her visual field, each data point a potential weapon, each piece of information a strategic advantage. To her left, prototype weapon systems that could phase through conventional matter sat like sleeping predators. To her right, adaptive camouflage technologies that could render entire battalions invisible flickered with quantum-encrypted potential. This was more than technology. This was humanity's ultimate response to being written off as a failed experiment. A series of targeting systems activated. Quantum-locked projectiles materialized in midair, their trajectories calculated across multiple potential dimensions. They weren't just weapons. They were mathematical proofs of human ingenuity. Each projectile could adjust its path, communicate with other projectiles, and modify its own molecular structure mid-flight. Adaptive combat interface at maximum efficiency, the adaptive intelligence reported. The suit began to interface directly with Rebecca's neural pathways. But this wasn't simple cybernetic enhancement. It was a complete symbiosis. Memories became tactical data. Emotional responses transformed into strategic calculations. The line between human and technology blurred into something entirely new. Outside the testing chamber, massive generational research facilities hummed with similar potential. Each underground complex was a crucible of innovation, a testament to humanity's refusal to be forgotten. Genetic modification labs stood alongside quantum computing centers. Adaptive material research facilities shared space with neural interface development zones. A sudden alert flashed across Rebecca's visual display. Zortak long-range scanners were attempting to probe deeper into Earth's orbital space. Most would see this as a threat. Rebecca saw an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's true technological capabilities. Initiate demonstration protocol, she subvocalized. The combat suit responded instantly. Adaptive camouflage systems came online, not just rendering her invisible, but creating multiple quantum-locked projections that could exist simultaneously in different potential spaces. To any external observer, it would look like a glitch in reality itself. Weapon systems that could pass through conventional matter began to activate. Quantum tunneling projectiles materialized, their very existence a middle finger to traditional understanding of physics. Each weapon was more than a tool of destruction. It was a statement of human potential. The adaptive intelligence that had guided humanity's survival for generations seemed to pulse with something almost like excitement. This was the moment of demonstration. The moment when humanity would show the galaxy that they were far more than a failed experiment. All systems prepared, the AI announced. Rebecca Chen allowed herself the slightest smile. Generations of preparation, of careful genetic modification, of pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible, it was all coming to fruition. The Zortak believed they were dealing with a dead world. They had no idea of the technological singularity brewing beneath the surface. Outside, to any distant observers, nothing had changed. Just another dead planet, spinning silently in the vast darkness of space. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The Memorial Hall of New Prometheus pulsed with collective memory, a living archive of human survival that defied everything the Zortak believed possible. Dr. Gabriel Rodriguez stood at the center of the massive underground chamber, watching as the latest group of young citizens underwent their ancestral memory integration. Virtual reality chambers lined the walls, each a portal into humanity's most painful memories. This was more than a historical record. It was a weapon. Each citizen would experience the collective trauma of their ancestors, transforming personal pain into a unified strategic consciousness. The first memory sequence began. A young colonist named Maria Santiago materialized in the integration chamber, her body suspended in a quantum-adaptive neural interface. The world around her shifted, no longer the sterile underground facility, but a dying colony world from nearly 2 centuries ago. Bitter cold. Failing life support systems. The desperate final transmissions of colonists abandoned by the Zortak. Transmission incoming, a soft voice announced. Not quite human, not quite AI. An adaptive intelligence that had been cultivated through generations of survival. The memory was brutally precise. Maria could feel the cold seeping into her bones, could taste the recycled air growing thin. Communication logs played out around her, desperate messages to a civilization that had already decided to abandon them. Promises of rescue, promises of support, promises that never came. In the observation room, Dr. Rodriguez watched carefully. Each memory integration was more than a historical lesson. It was a carefully designed psychological weapon. The Zortak had made a critical mistake. They had not just abandoned a colony. They had created a generational trauma that would become humanity's most potent weapon. Another colonist's memory activated. A child's perspective this time. Watching parents work frantically to maintain life support systems. The slow realization that no rescue was coming. The brutal mathematics of survival. Collective memory synchronization at 97.3%. The adaptive intelligence reported. Each chamber told a different story, but the core remained the same. Abandoned. Forgotten. Left to die. But they didn't die. Maria's integration completed. Tears streamed down her face. Not just her own, but the accumulated grief of generations. But these were not tears of weakness. They were the fuel of revenge. The memorial hall was a living weapon. Every citizen who underwent the memory integration became part of a collective consciousness that transformed personal trauma into strategic determination. Dr. Rodriguez moved between the integration chambers. Each one represented a different colony, a different moment of abandonment. Preserved communication logs, final transmissions, genetic records of those who survived against impossible odds. Phase 6 activation confirmed, the adaptive intelligence announced. Outside the memorial hall, massive data cores processed and preserved these memories. They were more than historical records. They were a comprehensive database of human resilience. Every struggle, every moment of survival, every impossible choice. The Zortak had written off humanity as a failed experiment. They had no idea of the weapon they had created. A holographic display showed the current state of Zortak communication networks. The psychological warfare was working. Internal conflicts were erupting. Political structures were beginning to fracture. Maria emerged from her integration chamber. Her eyes were different now, filled with a collective memory that transformed personal grief into something far more powerful. Determination. "The memories are ready," she said simply. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. Each citizen was now a living weapon. Each memory a precisely targeted psychological assault. The Zortak had abandoned human colonies, believing them to be insignificant. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The memorial hall of New Prometheus continued to pulse, a beacon of survival, a testament to human resilience, a weapon more devastating than any physical assault. Somewhere above the underground facility, alien ships continued their routine scans, completely unaware of the technological and psychological storm brewing beneath the surface of a world they had long considered dead. They would learn. Soon, the void of space erupted with a silence more terrifying than any explosion. Admiral Elena Rodriguez watched from the command center of the generational warship Prometheus, her neural interfaces dancing across quantum-encrypted display systems that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Massive orbital platforms began to unfold like mechanical flowers, each movement a testament to generations of hidden preparation. These were not simple warships. They were mobile civilizations, each vessel capable of sustaining millions of humans, while simultaneously functioning as the most advanced weapon systems ever conceived. Full deployment initiated, the adaptive intelligence announced. Its voice carried the weight of centuries, a direct descendant of the first AI developed during humanity's darkest hours. The Zortak fleet hung in space, momentarily paralyzed by the impossible sight. Where moments before there had been nothing but the expected emptiness around a dead world, now massive generational ships materialized with a precision that defied conventional understanding of space warfare. The first wave of attacks was not about destruction. It was about demonstration. Quantum-locked projectiles began to dance between the Zortak ships. Each projectile was a mathematical marvel, capable of changing trajectory, communicating with other projectiles, adapting its molecular structure mid-flight. They moved with a logic that was almost alive, targeting specific system vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Admiral Rodriguez's augmented eyes processed information across multiple dimensional layers. Each potential conflict scenario mapped itself in real time, potential outcomes calculated and recalculated in milliseconds. The neural interface was more than a communication tool. It was a living strategy engine that integrated the collective experiences of generations. Adaptive camouflage at maximum efficiency, her second in command, Commander Michael Chen, reported. His voice was calm, almost clinical, the product of generations of military preparation. The generational ships were works of art, as much as they were weapons. Massive structures that could sustain entire ecosystems, with adaptive hull materials that could reconfigure themselves faster than the Zortak could process. Quantum-encrypted communication networks created a living, breathing battle space that was more organism than mechanical system. Zortak defensive systems began to activate, but they were already too late. Humanity's preparation had been generations in the making. Each defensive protocol, each weapon system, had been studied, analyzed, and countered long before this moment. Initiating psychological warfare cascade, the adaptive intelligence reported. Holographic transmissions began to flood Zortak communication channels. Not just messages, but living memories. The final moments of abandoned colonies. Personal logs of those left to die. Each transmission was a precision-guided emotional weapon that tore through the aliens' communication networks. The first Zortak capital ship began to break apart, not from traditional weapon damage, but from a systematic dismantling of its core systems. Quantum-encrypted viruses wormed through its defensive networks, turning the ship's own systems against itself. "Target neutralized," Commander Chen announced. It was more than a battle. It was a systematic deconstruction of an entire military philosophy. The Zortak had believed humanity was a failed experiment. They were about to learn the true meaning of human innovation. Adaptive combat suits filled the internal spaces of the generational ships. Each suit was a living weapon system, neural interfaces that could predict and counter threats before they fully manifested. Soldiers who were more than human, enhanced through generations of careful genetic and technological modification. Another Zortak ship fell, then another. The adaptive intelligence seemed to pulse with something almost like satisfaction. Generations of preparation, of careful strategic planning, of pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. It was all coming to fruition. Admiral Rodriguez allowed herself the slightest smile. This was not just revenge. This was a statement, a declaration that humanity would never again be forgotten, never again be considered insignificant. Complete orbital superiority achieved, the adaptive intelligence announced. Outside, to any distant observers, nothing had fundamentally changed. Just another conflict in the vast darkness of space. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The communication burst traveled faster than light, a quantum-encrypted message that would reshape galactic understanding. Dr. Aria Chen stood at the primary transmission hub of New Prometheus, her fingers dancing across interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Transmission sequence initiated, the adaptive intelligence announced. Its voice carried the weight of generations, a direct descendant of the first AI developed during humanity's darkest hours. This was more than a simple communication. It was a declaration. The message began with a visual record, pristine, untouched historical footage that would force every sentient civilization to bear witness. Images of the first human colonial attempts, the desperate struggles, the moment of abandonment, personal logs, scientific records, a comprehensive narrative that laid bare humanity's journey from abandoned experiment to galactic force. Quantum communication arrays began to pulse, sending the transmission across multiple communication bands. No civilization would be able to ignore this message. No species would be able to look away. Aria watched the transmission unfold, her augmented eyes processing multiple layers of information simultaneously. Each frame was a weapon. Each sound bite a strategic calculation. The first layer showed the brutal mathematics of survival. How humanity had been left to die on barely habitable worlds. How they had not just survived, but thrived, transformed, evolved. Zortak communication networks, already fractured by previous psychological warfare, began to collapse under the weight of the comprehensive transmission. Internal conflicts erupted. Political structures crumbled. Transmission reaching maximum distribution, the adaptive intelligence reported. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer a forgotten species. They were a force that would define their own destiny. Holographic displays tracked the transmission's impact across known space. Communication networks lit up like neural pathways, each point of contact a potential moment of revelation. The adaptive intelligence calculated potential responses, diplomatic implications, strategic outcomes. Aria's grandmother, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, had been one of the original architects of this moment. Her journals, preserved in the Central Archives, had always spoken of this day, not as a moment of revenge, but as a moment of reclamation. Another layer of the transmission began, technological demonstrations that would make other civilizations question everything they understood about innovation. Quantum computing systems that could process information across multiple dimensions, adaptive combat technologies that blurred the line between biological and mechanical, genetic modifications that transformed humans into something more than their original form. Psychological impact projections at 98.7%, the adaptive intelligence announced. The transmission was a living document, not just a message, but a comprehensive record of human survival. Every struggle, every impossible choice, every moment of innovation born from desperation. Outside the transmission hub, Massive data cores continued to process and preserve these memories. They were more than historical records. They were a comprehensive database of human resilience. Aria allowed herself a slight smile. The Zortak had written off humanity as a failed experiment. They had abandoned human colonies, believing them to be insignificant. They were wrong. So terribly wrong. The final sequence of the transmission began. A direct address from the collective leadership of humanity. Not a threat. Not a declaration of war, but a simple, devastating statement of existence. We are humanity, the collective voice announced. We were abandoned. We survived. We evolved. And we are here. Communication networks across multiple star systems began to process the transmission. Diplomatic channels erupted. Scientific communities began to analyze the unprecedented technological demonstrations. The adaptive intelligence seemed to pulse with something almost like satisfaction. Generations of preparation, of careful strategic planning, of pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible, it was all coming to fruition. Transmission complete, the system announced. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, alien civilizations were about to learn a fundamental truth. Humanity was no longer a forgotten species. They were a force that would reshape understanding itself. They were wrong. So terribly wrong.